Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast, where we peel back the layers of societal delusion and expose the hidden complexities of modern life. Today, we delve into the mind of British documentary filmmaker Adam Curtis, as interviewed by Nathalie Olah for Crack magazine. Curtis, known for his unsettling films that weave together politics, history, and technology, offers a stark critique of the systems that shape our world today. In this extended interview, Curtis challenges the outdated ways we perceive reality, particularly through the mental maps we use to navigate it, a concept central to our conversation today. Let's start with Curtis's core idea. The map is not the territory. This phrase, attributed to philosopher and linguist Alfred Korzybski, reminds us that the representations we create, our maps, are just simplified abstractions of a far more complex and unpredictable reality. Curtis argues that the maps we've been using to understand the world are not just outdated, but dangerously misleading. They give us the illusion of understanding and control, when in fact the reality we face is far more dynamic and unruly. We're relying on models from the past to navigate a world that has fundamentally changed. In his interview with Olah for Crack magazine, Curtis directs this critique at the climate change movement, which he believes has been stymied by technocratic thinking. According to Curtis, the climate movement has become bogged down in a bureaucratic approach that treats the problem as a matter of tweaking systems and managing resources. The underlying belief is that if we just make the right adjustments, dial down the temperature, lower emissions, shift to renewable energy, we can stabilize the planet. But Curtis sees this as a dead end. The problem, he argues, isn't just technical, it's philosophical and existential. Curtis contends that the climate movement, particularly among the bourgeois green class, has embraced a narrative of fear, an obsession with imminent apocalypse that ultimately paralyzes any meaningful action. He describes a sort of self-indulgent despair, where people resign themselves to the idea that we're all doomed, without ever grappling with the real systemic transformations needed to prevent disaster. Fear, Curtis argues, is not a motivator for change. It's a dead weight that keeps us stuck in place, clinging to a sense of powerlessness while the world continues to heat up. But Curtis's critique of outdated maps extends beyond climate change. He points out that modern politics, too, has fallen into a kind of nostalgia trap. Politicians like Kamala Harris in the US or Keir Starmer in the UK are hailed as progressive, but Curtis sees their platforms as little more than reboots of old failed systems. It's a politics of nostalgia, a longing to return to a time when the world felt stable and the systems seemed to work. The irony, Curtis notes, is that those systems never really worked in the first place. They just masked deeper problems. And now that the mask has slipped, we're left with leaders who offer only shallow reassurances rather than bold, transformative visions. Curtis identifies this attachment to the past as part of a broader cultural phenomenon, the fetishization of stability. In an era of rapid change and uncertainty, we cling to the idea that if we can just keep things the way they are, politically, environmentally, economically, then everything will be fine. But history, as Curtis is keen to remind us, is never stable. It moves, it shifts, and it transforms. The forces of change are relentless, and trying to maintain the status quo is a futile exercise. The maps we use, whether they are political ideologies, economic models, or climate strategies, are attempts to impose order on a world that refuses to be ordered. And nowhere is this more evident than in our obsession with technology, particularly artificial intelligence. Curtis is skeptical of AI as the solution to our problems, describing it as a strange. AI, he argues, is a feedback loop of past behaviours and decisions, incapable of imagining anything new. It can only replicate what has already happened, trapping us in a cycle of optimization without innovation. For Curtis, AI symbolises our desire for control, our belief that if we can just perfect the algorithms, we can manage the world. But history, like climate, doesn't respond to management. It responds to creativity, vision, and the ability to imagine a future that doesn't yet exist. Curtis's critique is not limited to the realms of technology or climate. In politics, he sees the same patterns of stagnation and nostalgia. He describes today's politicians as caretakers of a system in decline, lacking any real vision for the future. Curtis is particularly scathing about the current political class, noting that figures like Harris or Starmer are less about forward-thinking leadership and more about managing the slow unravelling of the systems they inherited. They offer nothing new, just more of the same, wrapped in the language of progress but fundamentally rooted in the past. But Curtis isn't simply critiquing for the sake of it. He's asking us to look deeper, to challenge the very foundations of how we think about change. In his interview with Olah, Curtis notes that revelations of corruption or injustice, once shocking, now barely register. We hear about tax havens, political graft, and corporate malfeasance, but nothing ever changes. Why? Curtis suggests that it's because we're stuck in a loop, endlessly recycling the same narratives of outrage and reform without ever addressing the structural issues at their core. The old map of expose, outrage, reform no longer fits the territory. The systems are too entrenched, too self-perpetuating for mere exposure to bring about change. So what's the solution? Curtis doesn't offer easy answers, but he does point us in a direction. He argues that the first step is to stop relying on the old maps. We need to acknowledge that the world is far more complex and unpredictable than the systems we've built to manage it. We need to embrace creativity, imagination, and above all, a willingness to think beyond the structures that have defined us for so long. The future isn't something that can be managed. It's something that must be created. And that's where we'll leave you today. Curtis may not have handed us a new map, but he's shown us why the old ones no longer work. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Deeper Thinking podcast, an audio essay read by me, Holly, your digital narrator. To learn more about the subjects covered today, check out the links in the show notes. Until next time.